Welcome back, everyone, to the NPC Dungeon. For those of you who've been following this show recently, you'll know this is a very special episode. Today, we're going to give the NPC Bonk a bit of a send-off. I was going to publish this as 2 episodes, but after last week's very short one, and after I misspoke on last week's episode on DM Confidence, saying that this week was going to be Bonk's finale, I decided to put them together as one large episode. Bonk does obviously make an appearance, but it's not just about him. It gets a little bit more to the characters and to the story, but don't worry, this isn't it for a friend. Next episode, I'm going to take a brief break from this story and tell a few mini stories about a character that I played a very long time ago. But next episode after that, Bonk will be back for his real send-off. If you haven't listened to the other 2 preceding episodes, go ahead and do that so you're all caught up. But since this one is going to be a bit of a long one, we're going to just go ahead and get started with it. So, what happened? We begin with our friends V and 57 once again. They tried to follow a set of possible Ettercap tracks, which ended up just being wolf tracks, all the way to where it had been turned to stone by a den of cockatrice. After a battle with the small chicken-like creatures which can turn you to stone by biting you, they were due for a break. So they took refuge in a cave which they believed to be related to the Ettercaps they were sent to find. While there, they were, because of course they were, attacked by spiders and just barely fended them off with the help of their new companion, the Dragonborn Paladin Krieve, who you'll remember from the episode Don't Mess with Pixies. He found them while he was wandering through the forest, and together they felled the spiders one by one. But between the webs and the spiders' superior numbers, my players were becoming more and more desperate, so instead of investigating further into the cave, they fled out the way they came in the middle of the battle and collapsed the entrance, locking the spiders inside. At this point, it's worth noting that as they stomped, blasted, and slashed at the spiders, one emerged that sidestepped, dodged, and leapt from their strikes, coming back from the jaws of death over and over again. And as they collapsed the cave, that persistent spider jumped out at them the last minute, its limbs splintered and broken, but V took a step toward it. If this thing's so tough, he said, it might behoove us to try to tame it. But it was a second creature recently that wanted nothing to do with him. It pounced on his face, fangs bared and legs clasped to his head, but 57 and Krieve slapped it off, made short work of it, and continued down the river much to V's chagrin and newfound headache. But that wasn't it for their little pit stops along the way. 57 eventually spotted something dancing across the surface of the water, and without thinking, ran. He booked it away without thinking twice. V, trusting his judgment by now for some reason, ran along with him. But Krieve was curious. He stood at the edge of the river and looked on, wanting to see what was causing all the fuss. A serpent, apparently about half his size, rose its head from the water and stared into his eyes, but he stared back, reading it as much as he could, trying to discern what it had spinning in that head of its. Then, an idea struck him. He reached into his rations and removed some food, holding it out before the beast. "What are you doing?" V shouted from at least 60 feet away. Needless to say, Krieve could hardly hear him, but he didn't need to. He nodded at the creature, and it snapped its jaws forward around the food he offered it, smiling and slithering around Krieve. It dove back into the water with a mighty splash and emerged once again, this time encapsulated in a closed ball of water, floating up out of the water and alongside him. "Oh, it was just hungry," said 57 as they continued forward. "My bad, I might have misread that." Another quick note, this creature was also pulled from Stibbles. Again, really great resource. The day passed, the sun arcing overhead until the sky grew dark and the moon reflected brightly in the river at their side. They reached a bend in the river and knew they were close, but before them was something none of them could have predicted. Above the river here was a rocky overhang that bore a small cave entrance. Countless Flumphs, which are small jellyfish-like creatures that feed off of emotional energy and are usually wise and good-natured, poured from this entrance and floated over the bank of the river and danced across the surface of the water. Their gelatinous bodies glowed vibrant shades of violet and magenta as they formed themselves into giant shapes, incomprehensible from the party's current vantage point, but beautiful nonetheless. The party hid in the grass and behind some outcropping rocks and trees until it became increasingly obvious that they had been detected. Many of these strange creatures turned their eye stalks toward the party, but simply continued their dance, turning back away and eventually heading back into the cave. But one broke off and made its way toward V. Every ounce of magic within him spoke of a connection with this thing. As it approached, images projected into his head, images of him, of his own life, of who he used to be, of an ancient being, of a deal he struck, and he knew at once who had sent this creature here, and he knew at once why he was here. "Guys, I think we should go inside," said V as the last of the other Flumphs disappeared into the cavern, entering in through countless holes and entrances that peppered the surface of the rocky outcropping. The Flumph at his side nodded its whole body enthusiastically, but 57 narrowed his eyes at the pair. He wasn't sure what to make of V's sudden decision, but he'd been out in the wild before, and he knew one thing for sure. When a Flumph gave you advice, you'd be a fool not to take it. So he shrugged once again and walked toward the cave with V. Krieve, on the other hand, looked at them dumbfounded. "You're just going to go into some random cave just because some random thing told you to? It's a Flumph," said 57, but V thought it best to stop any further doubt before it started. "Pretty much," he said, looking over his shoulder at the Dragonborn. "You coming?" Krieve shook his head. "No, I am not. not? I'm going to stay right here and take a nap. You two just be sure to come back and wake me up before you leave. No promises, 57 responded as they left Creve behind. But as the other two disappeared into the cave, Creve saw the first of his nemesis that emerged in Don't Mess with Pixies, and no, it wasn't Pixies. He laid down and rolled over and tossed and turned, but sleep just couldn't find him. He looked up from where he lay to see a massive, grotesque humanoid herding 3 spiders and wielding a giant, gnarled wooden staff at its side. Creve choked down his fear and hid behind his rock, waiting for the thing to pass, and it did, but continued until reaching the cave's entrance. Ducking down and entering in through one of the countless other side entrances, he knew that he had warned the others. He took a breath, shook his head, and raced into another entrance, looking for any stray Flumph to lead him to his friends. They owe me for this, he said under his breath as he disappeared inside. Meanwhile, V and 57 followed their new Flumph companion into a wide open segment of the cavern, with a path branching out of a seemingly bottomless drop and ending in the middle of the open space, suspended on nothing and stopping in midair. Upon its surface was what appeared to be a giant mushroom. It glowed brightly and was surrounded by countless other Flumphs dancing around it in some kind of rapturous awe. V and 57 had figured out by now the Flumphs had pretty much led them here and stopped in front of it. They watched as the world around them vanished and dissolved, and wasn't long before a voice reverberated into 57's head. Your friend, it said, contains an ancient power. You'd be wise to be wary of him. His suspicions were confirmed, but didn't know what to do with this. He simply nodded and stepped back, unsure if he should even trust this thing. But V experienced something completely different. He watched as this mushroom melted into a cloud of shadow and boomed out a loud commanding voice. You have done well thus far. Our time approaches. But first, this high craft. He sent you to search for mere monsters, but there is something much more powerful than the path that you walk. A weapon capable of rending apart the fabric of reality, tearing away the space between mortal planes. It is beneath the city that you are sent to, and in the possession of a civilization torn by madness. I request that you find this and bring it back to me. V nodded. This being was source of his power, and he knew he couldn't refuse. I will, he said simply. He came to as he and 57 eyed each other somewhat suspiciously, neither one aware of anything the other had just experienced. The mushroom was back to normal as a giant glowing fungus could be, that is, and the Flumphs began to end their dance as Creve came barreling down from the path atop a cluster of floating Flumphs. The two turned around in surprise, holding back their laughter as Creve shouted up at them. Look! He pointed up at a ledge high above them. Crawling out from a small tunnel onto the ledge was the same ettercap he'd seen on the way, complete with its gnarled wooden staff and 3 spiders. The Flumphs shivered and sank beneath the path as the party readied for a fight. The ettercap raised its staff as several points of bright shimmering light shone out from it and rocketed toward them. The 3 dodged the blast as it collided with the pathway they stood on. It's going to take out the bridge if we don't stop it soon, 57 shouted. On it, said V, more serious than usual, as he sent out every warlock's favorite overpowered spell, the Elder's Blast. But it only crashed against some invisible surface, the unseeable magic rippling before the ettercap in front of them. He shook his head. We have to get off that ledge somehow. But no sooner had he said this than did the 3 spiders shoot their webs across the chasm and begin crawling their way to the party. I'll handle those, said 57. He pulled out his crossbow and took out one of the spiders as Creve ran over and slashed one of the other webs in 2. The 2 arachnids plummeted to the depths as the ettercap rose both hands above its head this time, forming a huge ball of fire above it and sending it hurtling toward the bridge. It smacked into its surface, shaking the structure and everyone on it. I have an idea, Creve shouted, struggling for his balance as 57 blasted the last of the spiders off with his crossbow. Creve held his hands out, sending out a gale of rushing wind at the thing, but it held fast. Even as 57 snapped his fingers, producing a flame that licked past the winds and grew until billowing up toward the creature. It broke through its defenses, but when the smoke cleared, it was still standing, forming another ball of fire over its head. But V couldn't allow it. He knew what would happen if this blast connected. They all did. So he instructed his Flumph to fly up and spray a cloud of stinking poison at the thing. The fireball depleted and withered away as the ettercap lost itself in fits of choking coughs. Now is his chance. A small spectral hand floated up toward the staff and wrested it from the grasp as the Flumph absorbed images from the ettercap's mind and set them toward V. He saw a den in an abandoned town covered with sentient ooze. At least now he knew what drove the ettercaps out. Watch out, Creve yelled, hurling his own flames at the ledge now. It crumbled underneath the creature as it plummeted far beneath them, never to be seen by them again. The sounds of battle coming to an end, the Flumphs rose back up and circled around them until forming a platform with their bodies. The party, with nothing left to do, stepped onto its surface and the Flumphs rose them up into the air until passing through a wide gap on the ceiling and on to another level of the cave. The Flumphs disappeared, leaving the players behind, leaving bright flecks of purple and lavender light reflecting off the walls until they eventually disappeared beneath them. That was the end of the first part of the story, and here is the second part that I was telling you about in the beginning. If you want, feel free to take a break, get a snack, go for a walk, and then come back, or just continue forward if you like. Either way, on with the story. The cavern my party found themselves in opened up into a massive corridor and stretched on seemingly for miles. As they walked forward, they noticed massive statues of fish people lining the walkway, but it wasn't long before rapid tapping filled their ears, and they soon spotted a creature with the body of a massive crow and giant hooks for hands, called a hook horror if you didn't know, crouching down to the ground, nose to the ground, hunting for something. It cocked its head and ceased its rhythmic tapping against the wall as the players approached. Two more appeared behind the party and attacked the players. The group made short work of them as whatever prey these beasts were apparently hunting descended from the ceiling. Dark mantles, the shape of great stalactites, they descended upon the players, landing on their heads and trying to crush them. As V and Creve fought them, fending them off and protecting their heads, 57 didn't have to lift a finger. His dark mantle couldn't find purchase on his gelatinous head, so it gave up and resigned itself to simply sitting there. He named him Pointy McEyeball and says these things do have a lot of eyes, and now he could officially say that he, along with the rest of his party members, had a companion of some kind. But before they just continued down the corridor, they decided that it was best to rest for a while. Besides, Creve wanted to harvest one of the hooks off the creatures they just fought. As their rest came to a close, 57 leaned over to V. "Hey, I think we should talk," he said. But no sooner did their rest end and they began packing up than did they begin to hear that same tapping and scraping as before. 57 once again booked it away, followed shortly by V, who, for some reason, though not quite as much as before, still trusted his judgment. And it was a good thing too. Countless other hook horrors filled the hall, squawking viciously and rushing the party. V blasted one as 57 slashed at several others, but it wasn't enough. One jumped up from behind and tackled him to the ground. V was well ahead, but he could still see 57. He turned around and blasted the creature, putting him down as Pointy McEyeballs, again, lifted him into the air by his head. One more dove for V. His Flumph transformed into a small pseudo-dragon and grabbed him by the arms, pulling him forward out of harm's way. "Wait, you can do that?" It turned back and nodded. "Good to know." And the two were well underway, outrunning the things, and they remembered Creve. They turned around and looked back to see him harvesting the hook he wanted when a crowd of hook horrors swarmed him and his companion. They watched in horror, believe it or not, no pun intended, as he disappeared into the mass. His serpent he just recently befriended being carried away into the beak of another one of these strange creatures. But V had a plan. He had one last thing he could do, one last resource he could turn to. He closed his eyes and summoned his patron. Transported into a shadowy realm of tenebrous darkness, he stared into the void and requested his friend be saved. The low, cacophonous voice filled his ears and responded that he would, but that he would demand a price. V demanded that he know the price, but his patron simply laughed and vanished, bringing V back to the world he came from. He rushed back into himself in an instant and was again running alongside 57. But there seemed to be no change. He looked back and saw the same crowd gathering around what apparently was Creve. He nearly cursed his patron under his breath, but thought better of it and continued forward. But he had to act fast. The path forward wouldn't go on for much longer. It ended shortly ahead, opening up into an abyssal drop. No, it wasn't just a drop, it was a city, carved out into an enormous cylinder, sprinkled with layers upon layers of decrepit buildings. V, thinking fast, jumped down, grappled onto a loose pipe, and slid into a narrow alley. 57's feet dangled above the ground as his dark mental companion lifted him up and flew out a little further. But from this vantage point, he noticed something a little odd. The city seemed mostly empty, aside from the few fish people scattered around. At least that explained the statues. But wait, what was that? He looked down to the base of the city and saw a swarming crowd of these fish people far below. One from one of the upper layers apparently saw him, and their alarmed shouts filled the space. The chase wasn't over yet. V continued sprinting forward until his narrow alley was replaced by a more open city square, what appeared to be a small tavern tucked into one of the corners. He rushed inside, kicking open its rickety saloon doors to see a room cleared completely empty, except for a small balcony in the back about halfway up the wall and leading outside. Even the stairs leading up to it had been removed, and all the furniture inside had been replaced apparently by large, empty cages. They'd apparently stumbled into some kind of makeshift prison, and from inside one of the cages, a swirl of black smoke rose up from the ground and disappeared, revealing Creve laying face down on the floor of the cage. V ran over to pick the lock and to get it open as 57 rushed in behind him and stared with the wide eyes at Creve. How exactly? Doesn't matter, said V. He's alive, isn't he? Creve's eyes shot open. There was a being, he babbled. Then he turned his eyes toward V. You, he roared, rushing for him. What did you do? But 57 stepped between them. I think we have more important things to deal with right now, don't you? The unnerving, screaming battle cries of the fish people outside rose up, getting louder by the minute. Right, said V, running up to the cages. Hey, help me with this. And with 57's assistance, they pushed up the cages against the saloon doors, leaving one by the balcony to climb up. You guys can do whatever you want, said Creve, his voice competing against the fishy fists and shoulders slamming against the doors from the outside. But I'm out of here. And he turned and leapt out of the window. V shrugged, then climbed up the remaining cage, followed shortly by 57. He had another idea, and 57 had a funny feeling he knew exactly what it was. I know that look, he said, as V transformed himself into one of the little fish people and grabbed 57 by the arms. The horde broke through the door and looked up at the two. I caught him, shouted V, but the mass just stared back in confusion at this strange language before belting out strange and guttural sounds from deep within their throats. Did you not learn anything from Bonk? 57 asked. Not really, no. V pulled a rope out and handed it to 57. Here, tie this around your waist. 57 gave him a deadpan look as he grabbed the rope and shoved it into his gelatinous torso. Another one of your ideas? Sort of, said V, the crowd now leaping forward and beginning to climb the cage. V kicked one of them down down as 57 shot one with his crossbow. He took a look behind him. There was a window perched just above them. V snapped his fingers and the two vanished from visibility and leapt out of the window to stroll easily down the street. They eventually came across a tower, Reeve arriving shortly after them. Where have you been, they asked. You don't want to know. But before either one of them could ask, a cacophonous chanting like the verses of some rabid prayer fell upon them from above. And better yet, it was in common. The three bolted up the stairs in time to find another of these fish people, this one wearing long robes and wielding a staff. Who goes there? Shouted the shaking, deranged man. Messengers of your god, said V, remembering the countless others he saw gathered far below, and thinking quickly on his feet. You are conducting the ritual perfectly. And as far as natural 20s go, the priest fell to his knees and bowed at their feet. Of course, he said. Of course. I am humbled and thank you, all for the winged one, now for the sacrifice. The what? But he paid them no mind. Strangely enough, for a man thinking he's talking to the messengers of his god, he simply ran to a door in the back of the room and disappeared inside, emerging once more, followed shortly by a stout bullywug, bound in chains, with a bottle tied around its neck. Inside of that bottle was a familiar fish. At the mere sight of the fish, anger built up inside 57. Images of his burning boat flashed back through his head as he rushed the pair, yanked the bottle off of his neck, and threw it to the ground, shattering it as he stomped the fish inside. Everyone else, including the strange fishman, looked on in silent horror, never expecting 57 to do something like this in a million years. But Bonk wouldn't just stand idly by. His eyes widened, then narrowed with a mighty battle cry as he barreled after 57, charging him and tackling him out of one of the tower's windows. V looked down at the fish, gathered up another bottle for it, filled it with water, put the fish inside, and then, with everyone else, rushed down the stairs. The crash met the ground before they did, and when the dust cleared, the two were lying motionless on the ground. That was until 57 coughed, pushed Bonk off of him, picked him up, walked him over to the ledge leading further down to the city, and dropped him over the edge. Now what was the point of that? Said Grieve. It doesn't matter how his will is carried out, said the priestly fishman, as long as it is. That would be a good sacrifice. Anyway, follow me. He shuffled off, leading the party behind him as they walked down the steps along the city into the opening far below. And that's it for this week's story. I said it was going to be kind of long, and I hope it was still a good one. Thanks for listening, and as always, you can come back next Friday for a few mini stories about a character that even years later still is near and dear to my heart, and for a DM advice episode all about helping the game run smoothly from the DM's perspective. You can find this show pretty much wherever you get your podcasts and at the NPC Dungeon YouTube channel. Until next time, let's learn something.